Thanks everyone. The meetings are now being recorded and let's make a start. I declare the agenda briefing of Tuesday the 12th of July 22 open, the time now being 6 p.m. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and we also pay our respects to elders both past and present. In accordance with the City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with the opportunity to ask questions and seek information to enable informed decision making by Council at the following week's ordinary Council meeting. Briefings are held for the purpose of elected members asking questions and receiving answers to those questions from the City's administration. In accordance with the Local Government Act, agenda briefings are not decision making forums and there is to be no debate or discussion. Questions must be specifically relevant to the item being discussed. Members and employees must disclose any financial proximity or partiality interest they have in an item to be discussed and declare the nature of that interest at the commencement of the briefing or at the latest when the item is about to be discussed. If a member or employee has a financial proximity or partiality interest in a matter arising during discussion, the nature of that interest must be disclosed as soon as possible after the matter is raised. Interests are to be disclosed in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act as they apply to ordinary council meetings. Individuals disclosing an interest other than a partiality interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and leave the meeting room. Agenda briefings are public meetings and any information you provide this evening may be publicly accessible. The audio of this briefing is being live streamed to the City's YouTube account. In fact, I'm advised that we may not be doing that tonight. We had all sorts of issues at the special council meeting last week, a few technical issues which interrupted with the audio recording. So I believe tonight that we are just live streaming the audio recording of the meeting so that we have a clear and concise record of tonight's meeting. At item 2, attendance, we have a number of apologies tonight. We've received apologies today from Councillor Jacobs, Councillor Sweeney and also Councillor Sabiri. At item 2.2, approved leave of absence, Councillor Spencer Teo has previously had leave of absence approved for the period 11 to 15 July. At item 3, disclosures of interest, I'll just defer to the CEO. CEO, do we have any disclosures this evening?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've received no disclosures of financial interest nor any disclosures of interest affecting impartiality.
Thank you. So that at items 3.1 and 3.2 relating to disclosures, there are none. Question times for the public. At item 4.1, response to previous questions taken on notice, there are none. At item 4.2, questions from the public, the time set aside for public questions is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to an item on tonight's agenda paper. If a question cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. I'm going to open public question time now at 5 minutes past 6, so 6:05 p.m. The City's received a number of questions tonight from Mr Sarkar and Mr Walker. There have been questions posed by Mr McCoy. Those questions are not in keeping with the standing orders. They don't relate to any item on tonight's agenda and they will be held over until the ordinary council meeting on Tuesday next week. So those questions will be posed on that night and obviously answers provided in accordance with normal meeting procedure. Mr Sarkar, are you here? Would you like to please step forward and ask your questions? I'll ask you just to identify yourself to the meeting, please. Just state your name and your address and then go ahead with your first question.
Yep, my name is Shubhajit Sarkar. I live in Gibbs Street, East Kennington. Thank you. My first question, has there been any community consultation on the land development plan 2020 to 2025 or is there any plans to do so, particularly as this is a long-term proposal involving millions of dollars and will significantly change the state of council-held land and others in our city and therefore should require extensive input from our residents and ratepayers?
Director Kane.
Thank you. Through the Chair, The Land Utilisation Plan 2020 to 25 was adopted unanimously by Council at its ordinary Council meeting on the 15th of September 2020. The item currently before Council is simply a scheduled minor review of the adopted plan. No community consultation has been undertaken on the plan itself as part of this, part of its initial adoption, nor the minor review. This is because the plan only identifies land assets that are city-owned in freehold and have the potential to be optimised, taking into account the financial, economic, social and environmental values associated with those assets. Community consultation will be undertaken for specific proposals that are subject to any future recommendation to Council that involves an optimisation initiative. Examples include statutory advertising, that is local public notice under the Local Government Act 1995 in the case of a proposed disposal of any land or lease. Community engagement on strategic investigation where it is necessary to determine the views and needs of the local community, such as that occurred with the Whaleback Golf Course Master Plan. Or statutory advertising under the Planning and Development Act, that is the Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2015, as is the case of proposed development on city land that deviates from the requirements of the local planning framework.
Thank you, Mr Saki. A second question.
From the land optimization initiatives mentioned in the agenda, there seems to be hundreds of thousands of dollars allocated to consultation fees. What is the process of coming up with such extravagant estimates to be paid to consultants, and is there anything the city can do in the short and long term to reduce the amount of money we spend on consultants?
Director Kane.
Thank you. Through the Chair, of the $450,000 allocated to support works in the 2022-23 land optimisation budget, $190,000 is the estimate for the procurement of specialist consultants such as architects, civil engineers, environmental management consultant, planning, etc., that are needed to help us optimise the value of these land parcels. The nature of these skill sets is such that the city does not have them as an in-house resource, but we apply competitive tendering to ensure that when we do, we get the best value for money. Land developments undertaken by the private sector similarly requires such services. Just as a homeowner may require a valuer, a property conveyor, a structural engineer and a pest controller to assist the sale of their home, the aim is for these type of development costs to be more than recovered through the optimisation process.
Thank you, Mr Saki. Your third and final question.
The youth engagement plan seems to have very flowery language and superficial objectives. Can the council come up with more measurable and quantifiable goals for the framework, such as seeing more people from the age group 18 to 25 voting in council elections more, coming to council meetings, asking questions on the at the said meetings, increased participation from our young people in service and other community consultation initiatives, having more young people run as candidates in council elections, and therefore having more voice and representation from them in our council, etc., so that we can actually find out the ratepayer money we are spending on such initiatives, achieve actual results instead of the council patting itself on the back without making any meaningful change.
Director Kane. Oh, sorry. Sarah Gianelli.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I'm pleased to advise your feedback is aligned to several listed objectives and measures outlined in the Youth Framework's evaluation model. The framework provides a deliberately high-level strategic guiding model to allow sufficient scope for the city to work with young people in fleshing out the details of delivery to ensure they have some ownership and input into the implementation and that activities are youth-friendly. The measurement addendum lists a number of qualitative and quantitative measures that will specifically capture the significant change and impact City of Canning has achieved through this framework, directly relating to the points raised in your question. Some of these include the percentage increase in 18 to 25-year-olds voting in local government elections from previous elections, the percentage of young people indicating an increase in knowledge of decision-making processes and local government, the percentage increase in young people represented on city advisory committees and reference groups, the number of young people connected to leadership engagement opportunities, and the percentage increase in reach of youth-friendly communications. And this would delve into the numbers of young people that are accessing surveys and other engagements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Sarkar. Mr Walker, I'll ask you to come forward. We have a number of questions from Mr Steve Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Patrick Hall. Steve Walker, 22 Farnham Street, Bentley. All questions relate to agenda item proposed scheme amendment number 7 to LPS 42 Garden Centre use in Table 3 zoning table regarding 1 Court Road, Canning Vale. Question 1. From the item, agenda page 74.24b, in terms of the affected landowners, who exactly were the letters sent to?
Director Graham Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The amendment proposal is a textual amendment that seeks to simply introduce the land use class of garden centre as a use that can be considered in the rural zone, as it was under the previous town planning scheme for many years. Should the amendment proceed, those properties that are zoned rural would have the ability to apply for a garden centre use, which will be considered on its merits at that time. The amendment proposal was sent to the adjacent landowner, being the only other rural zoned lot within the City of Canning affected by the textual amendment, in addition to 8 service agencies and the cities of Gosnells, City of Armidale and the City of Coburn. The City of Gosnells and the City of Armidale did not respond. The landowners on the opposite side of A Court Road are within the City of Coburn who provided a response.
Thank you. Mr Walker, your second question.
Question 2. From the July 2022 item and attachments, does 1 Court Road new owners' willingness and behaviour of only discussing their plans / proposal to the investor owners of, in brackets, submitted table page 7, immediate neighbouring property, 5 Court Road, prove the failures of City of Canning consultation policies?
Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The City cannot comment on the applicant's willingness or behaviour. The amendment was advertised by the City.
Your third and final question, please, Mr Walker.
Okay. Note, planning outcomes WA on page 10 refer as the project site. Question 3, does the factual example of the investment property owner, 5 Court Road, being consulted by the project site, proposed retail nursery, 1 Court Road owner, and not the properties across the opposite side of a court road or the major juvenile detention centre opposite on Nicholson Road, once again show how profiteers are prioritised within City of Canning regulatory governmental systems?
Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The City disagrees with that assertion being made.
Thank you, Mr Walker. Thanks for coming along. Those are the final questions. Is there anyone else in the public gallery that hasn't asked a question, wish to ask a question? No, thank you. We'll close public question time now. The time is 6:14 p.m. and we'll move to item 4.3, deputations. A deputation has been approved for Mr Peter Fitzgerald on behalf of Urbis regarding item CD 014 of 22, the initiation of scheme amendment number 10 to local planning scheme number 42, portion of lot 102 in brackets number 280 close brackets, Bannister Road, Canning Vale, introducing additional gross floor area provisions within additional use site number 3 in Schedule B. Mr Fitzgerald, are you here? Thank you. Would you like to step forward? The microphone is already on. I'll ask you please just to introduce yourself to the council. Your deputation will be recorded, of course, and you have a maximum of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. As mentioned, my name is Peter Fitzgerald and I speak in relation to agenda item CD 1422, the initiation of scheme amendment number 10 to local planning scheme number 42. This relates to lot 102 Bannister Road, Canning Vale, better known as Perth Markets. I'm from Urbis and we are the project town planner. I'm joined tonight by Todd Wood, the Chief Property Officer of Perth Markets Group, and we would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have of us with respect of the proposal. Firstly, I'd like to thank the planning officers for their consideration and reporting on the proposal. The purpose of this deputation is simply to express our full support for the officers' recommendation to initiate an amendment to the planning scheme that would allow for an increase in the GFA floor space cap. The initiation of the proposed amendment for advertising is an important step in realising an exciting opportunity at Perth Markets, which is a vital business and employer within the City of Canning. The proposal is consistent with the established planning framework, and the reporting from Praxis and Uloth and Associates, which accompanied the officer report, confirmed that the proposal is also acceptable from a technical perspective. With respect to transport, modelling has been conducted at a high level commensurate with the amendment stage of the planning process, and it has determined that the proposed increase in GFA will not have any adverse impact on the local road network. More detailed modelling will be included at the development application stage. And in this regard, while there is no commercial arrangement agreed at this stage with any party, we can confirm that the Perth Markets Group will not be seeking a mainstream operator for the additional GFA. That was it from me. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming along.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I'd now invite Mr. Steve Walker to return to the podium if you would like to. Mr. Walker, I understand you have a deputation that you'd like to deliver. It has been approved. It's regarding item CD 013 of 22, adoption of scheme amendment number 6 to local planning scheme number 42 to 46 to 50, Hartfield Street, in brackets, lot 326, close brackets, Queen's Park, and 5 Godfrey Street, in brackets, lot 414, close brackets, Queen's Park. Mr. Walker, thank you. You have a maximum of 10 minutes to make your deputation.
Thank you, City of Canning. Steve Walker. From the July 2022 item, on page 30.5, there is also the ability to plant additional trees on 5 Godfrey Street. That's a cost. It's probably going to be borne by City of Canning. On page 31, we have point 12, asset management. I would add there is a loss of residential rateable land. Point 13, A, for sustainability considerations, your claim of transit-oriented design approach and local economic growth. On page 32, the risk table. Risk B, the consequence rating as insignificant. Okay, the complication of it all. As I said in my submitter effort, the existing Hartfield Park does appear to be an odd shape, and a partial reduction in its size should not negatively affect it, given your commentary. And on the scheme amendment report, I was right on page 5 and 6 with the sentences not matching the maps. That now has been matched by City of Canning officers. Okay, the sales price, $195,000 minus $20,000 expenses by City of Canning equals $175,000 revenue in 2022. I did say in my submitter effort, are we going to see more residential adjoining lands bought, demolished, and turned into additional car parking? The Turkish Islamic Association should be lobbying for more bus services on Washpool Road, and for those services to increase in the evenings and increase on the weekends. More and more car parking is not the solution anywhere in Perth. To that, City of Canning should keep that in mind when dealing with other suburbs across City of Canning. I also said on page 4 of my submitter effort, Queen's Park is a nice suburb, very green in parts, and is a redeveloped suburb from farm homesteads and large land pieces. Many of the immediate streets around Hartfield Street and Godfrey Street have modern redeveloped homes. If I had approached or said to City of Canning, hey, I want to buy a portion of Hartfield Park with street frontage for around $270,000, I'll build a residential house on it, live in it, won't use a car, won't have a caravan or boat, will pay residential rates annually. Will City of Canning sell to me? No. So how am I supposed to feel? Hartfield Street, Queen's Park, is a great location. Trees, greenery, modern homes, easy access to several regional road links. The Islamic Association being trustworthy neighbours to live next to. Got new state football centre nearby. Walking distance to upgraded Queen's Park regional sporting space and facilities, plus Queen's Park regional open space. Walking distance to George Way Queen's Park Reserve, which is a sports oval, etc. Walking distance to soon new Queen's Park rail station, walking distance to Cannington Leisurepex, and soon new $300 million Cannington rail station. Plus, we've got bus services on Walshbull Road. Well, it's more correct that City of Canning and City of Canning Council would have said possible 4 reasons to me if I wanted to buy a small portion of Hartfield Park with residential street frontage. 1, no. Or 2, no, another proposed residential home builder is bidding a higher price. Or 3, no, it is a portion of a park. Or 4, no, we've been speaking with the Islamic Association for years and had been expecting to sell to them for their expansion plans. Thanks.
Pinch the microphone from the director beside me so I can carry on. We'll move now to item 5 on tonight's agenda, which are items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public. We do have a number of gentlemen here for a particular item. I'll bring that forward. Councillors, that will be item CD 014 of 22, initiation of scheme amendment number 10, local planning scheme number 42. That's on page 57 of tonight's agenda, councillors. And I'm just going to ask, yes, it's on the screen now. Thank you very much, governance. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this item? Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. Just through you to Director Bride. I know it doesn't directly relate to the amendment to the planning scheme, but with respect to car parking, I understand it would normally be for a change of use for a building rather than a scheme amendment, but with the additional use provisions for the entire site, the Market City site, are we able to request car parking modification to improve accessibility to the site? Like Market City Tavern is an old building that has no accessible parking, given that car parking is one of the aspects for the entire site. Just thought it might be worth raising.
Director Bright.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You're correct in relation to the timing, so at the development application stage, obviously if any of the car parking in that footprint is being modified, that would have to comply with today's disability access standards. If the area you're talking about is outside the development footprint, it's difficult to then require the landowner to address, I guess, a historical parking scenario on another portion of the site. So it would depend on if there was configuration to the wider car parking area, then yes, we could potentially get additional disabled bays as part of the overall site.
Deputy Mayor, anything further?
As the in the deputation, it will be mentioned or dealt with more ideally down the track with respect to traffic flows. But I found it quite interesting on page 123 in the report that it just stated that even with the intersection upgrades at South Street, Ranford Road and Bannister Road, that it will continue to be poor but manageable with long traffic delays. And I just wondered at what point given our promotion for Canningow, at what point does that intersection become a failure that does become of concern?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, I might ask Troy Bosic, our Manager of Strategic Engineering, to answer that one. Thank you.
Mr Bosic.
Yes, through the Mayor. Well, the Ranford Road South Street link has been congested for a long time. It will always be congested, even with all the future road improvements that are planned. There will be a briefing of Council in the coming or next month in relation to Jandakot Eastern Link Road and a link through to Jandakot Airport. That will help reduce some of the traffic that is on South Street Ranford Road, but over time that will build up again to the congestion that we've got there now. The work's being done by Metronet over the rail bridge. That is being constructed to its ultimate standard. In the future, and there have been some discussions with the Department of Planning about widening South Street and Ranford Road even further, so that is between Bannister Road and Varland Avenue. So adding another lane in each direction, more than likely that will become a bus lane. However, at the intersections there'd be additional turning pockets being constructed. So we're having discussions with the Department of Planning on that, but that's not something that's going to be constructed in the short term or within the next 10 years. But there are plans to improve it, and with all roads, especially in an area like that, it is going to be congested during the peak period. Whilst Nicholson Road and Bannister Road are very congested during the peak period now, there is a lot of capacity at Willeary Drive right at the moment. And we are speaking to Main Roads about trying to improve those intersections even further, in particular for the larger vehicles.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, anything further?
Again, probably not directly related, but my understanding with when we were dealing with the Faith Community Church matters, that they use Market City Car Park on Sundays as a place to ferry people to their church services. Given the impact that this proposes to have on availability of car parking bays, I'm just wondering if that's still something that's done, and if it is, what would happen with Faith Community Church meeting their requirements in the future? Again, it's not really directly related to this. I'm just wondering what impact it would have.
Director, I can see Mr Bosic working his way to the microphone. Mr Bosic.
Yes, through the Mayor. Yeah, the church is not using the Market City site. They're using the Metcash site.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, on CD 01422 before we keep moving? Councillor Holland.
Yeah, I'd just like some start off with. Got a few questions. Mr Bosnich, you mentioned there's some scope at Willeary. Could you expand on that for us, please?
Mr Bosic.
Yes, through the Mayor. We're looking at improving access, in particular for the heavy vehicles through there. So at the moment, I don't think the 27.5 metre long trucks can utilise all those intersections to its best capacity. So it's only minor improvements, but just even at the moment, the capacity, it's well under capacity right now. So it's just a matter of encouraging people to use that link. And I suppose at the moment they feel they're prepared to wait to utilise Nicholson Road or Bannister Road or the Ranford Road ends to get out in lieu of the Willeary Drive access.
So you mean to use the link on Willeary, what you mean coming from Bannister Road? Or I don't quite understand how you mean to use the link.
Yeah, it's just really to use the road. I mean, there's enough capacity at that intersection for more traffic at the Willeary Drive, the Willeary Drive link between Roe Highway and Bannister Road. to get to Roe Highway. So there's enough capacity there. There's a lot more capacity at Wallery Drive right now, but people choose to use the
All right,
congested routes.
I'm just not getting this. You want to be able to use Wallery Drive to get onto Roe Highway?
Yes.
And where would they be coming from to get onto Wallery Drive in the first instance, from Bannister Road or from High Road?
Well, either way, if they're heading towards Fremantle and they're from Market City or a business down towards Market City, instead of using Bannister Road and South Street to get onto Roe Highway, they can utilise Bannister Road, Wallery Drive to get onto Roe Highway.
So you're wanting to put 27.5 metre trucks on Wallery?
Well, at the moment, some of the movements can be made quite easily on Wallery Drive. Just the section between Roe Highway and Bannister Road.
So just to go over the bridge and turn right and then go down towards Midland or whatever?
Yes, not to use Collins Road.
Jeez, I should hope not. The other question is, did we go for a community consultation on this? Unless I've missed it, I didn't see it in the report.
Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The stage we're at the moment is for Council to consider whether they wish to initiate the amendment. If the amendment is initiated, then that means it'll be publicly advertised, so all the landowners surrounding this particular site will be asked to comment on the proposal, and it'll be advertised on Your Say and the whole lot.
So if we do the amendment now and then advertise, what difference does it make of the public comment after that? The amendment's been made.
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor. So what happens is the amendment will be advertised for a 42-day period, and then it's required to come back to Council. So there's two steps. One's the initiation. If Council agrees to start the process, then it gets advertised. After advertising, it comes to Council for a decision as to whether it wishes to proceed or not, based on the feedback from the community.
Last one, what sort of... Sorry?
Yeah, Councillor Holland.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I should have waited. What sort of... I hope it's not just within the 200 metres or whatever that we go out and community feedback, because that'll only be 3 shops and a couple of dogs. Because the Market City is so big, there's nothing over the other side except Soils Ain't Soils, nothing over the other side except the shops there. And this is going to have more impact on community as well, not only the business area. So what sort of area are we going to do around there for community feedback?
Director Bright, has that been determined yet?
Through Mr Mayor, we'll be guided by the policy, so there'll be a minimum of 200, and that would be from the externalities of the site. So you do pick up quite a few properties in that location. It will be advertised on Your Say Canning, and it'll be made very visible on social media as well. So there would be more general application to this, but certainly at the very minimum, the 200 metres would come from the external boundaries of the site, not from the location of where the proposed future retail establishment will be positioned.
Thank you, Director.
So you won't get any community residential feedback whatsoever?
Director?
Well, if you look at the site itself, it would pick up a reasonable portion of the residential catchment just to the south side of the railway line. So, whilst the site itself is quite large, it does, I guess, is adjacent to residential. So if you do the 200 metres around the property, you'll pick up a fair few residential properties.
Right, 10? I know the area. It's not a great area, especially when you include the railway line. Sorry?
Just your question, please.
Well, yeah, I'd like to know how many, because if you the width of the railway line and all that, what's 80 or 90 metres all up, you've only got 110 metres further down, and that's in the Caledonia estate that we're talking about. It doesn't go out that far very much.
Director, did you want to take that on notice so we are going to give a definitive
I'll take,
number about
I'll take that on
residences?
notice and we can report back to Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions in relation to that item, councillors, before we move on? No further questions. Thank you, Mr Fitzgerald, for coming along this evening. You and the gentleman accompanying you tonight can certainly leave if you would like to. The matter will be discussed and a decision made at next Tuesday's council meeting at the same time. Thank you very much. Councillors, we'll move on to item 7.1, and we move back to the substantive agenda. It's OC 003 of 22, The item subject is Annual Mayoral Civic Dinner. The officer's recommendation is on page 1 of the late item agenda and is on screen. Are there any questions in relation to this matter? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I see that, I think when I read that it's going to be a formal dinner. It's a sit-down affair, not as opposed to a cocktail party, which we've had in the last before, pre-COVID. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be a sit-down dinner, yes, formal affair.
And we're hoping to get sponsorship to save on the $50,000 that we're allocating in the budget.
I might get the CEO to actually answer these questions, but just in the first instance, yeah, that's the intent of it. We have a policy now recently adopted by Council in relation to sponsorship, which allows us to seek sponsorship for certain events, and this obviously is a civic event. And we also, of course, have a policy that determines that a civic event of this nature should be held each year. But Mr CEO, would you answer the question in relation to the budget?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the proposal in front of Council is that it is a ticketed event. The cost of the event would be covered by the tickets sold that will be generated A, through ticket sales, and B, through sponsorship, where a sponsorship package will in part offset the cost of the event and also be remitted to a charitable organisation. So that's the current proposal as it's before Council.
Councillor Holland.
You offset to the 50,000. So if there's any money made on top of the 50,000 that we'll be spending, that's the part that would be going to the charity. Is that what I mean? The 50,000 would be reimbursed first, and then the excess after that would be going to the charity. Is that right?
CEO.
The $50,000 relates principally to the cost of events that have been held previously. The intent here is that the cost would be closer to $20,000. That's generally the cost of the city purchasing 100 tickets for the event. So obviously the event will be covered by the costs of the ticket sales, and anything over and above that will be remitted to charities. There will be a sponsorship package where a part of the sponsorship package will actually be allocated directly to the charities. There will also be an auction that is proposed that will also generate some money back to charitable organisations.
I haven't come across a ticketed event before. Is it common practice that we actually charge invitees to come along? Is that normal? And could you give me an approximate price that would be to the attendees? I hadn't heard of this before.
I'd be happy to speak to that one first, CEO, and then I might just defer to you. Yeah, it's actually the first time this will have been done, I believe, in Western Australia. It's the first time a mayoral event of this nature will not be, I guess, typically a bit of a knees up, where we'll be actually having a purpose, which will be a charitable purpose. And we think that tickets at the moment will be somewhere between $165 and $185. It's a fundraising event. Those tickets will also be made available under the policy. A certain number of tickets must be provided to certain people, and they'll obviously be members of Parliament, CEOs of neighbouring councils, civic leaders, people that may be leaders and presidents of local community groups. The policy actually lists a whole raft of people that the city will ensure are included, and obviously that is the intent. It's not something, Councillor Holland, that's happened here before, but on the eastern coast of Australia it's something that's been happening for many years, and they almost all invariably hold a large charitable event and leverage off the local government. I think it's a good outcome if we can reduce the cost and provide a benefit to the community. So to answer your question, about 165 to 185 at this moment.
I'm not totally against it, Mr Mayor. I won't say that. So I was using it whether it's over East or not here. The way they structure their councils over there is completely different to me. They're politicised, as we all know. They're totally politicised. But that's different. The policy, what's the policy? We've got a policy on this. Excuse my ignorance. Obviously we have. Yeah,
it's all in the report. It says, I think it's CM 177 is the policy in relation to civic events. And we also have another one, obviously, that was, I think, adopted. The policy in relation to sponsorship of civic events is a separate policy, and that was, I think, adopted by council in 2020, so fairly recently by this council. So we have the policies that allow one for sponsorship, the other one for a civic event. The only decision we're asking for council is council supportive of the function being held, but with a charitable purpose.
Okay.
So,
Is it going to be held, is it here?
Going to be held at the agricultural centre, the big hall there, which holds about 600 people, but obviously we won't have that sort of capacity, but it's a beautiful big hall across the road. We think it's a good opportunity to also promote the agricultural centre across the road.
Are we looking at any specific number?
At the moment, we're hoping to sell about 300 tickets, which would be about 30 tables of 10. That's what we're hoping to do.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Ben Kunza.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, the report outlines that funding's allocated in every budget, but in my for mayoral dinners. But in my time, we've never had a mayoral dinner. I'm just wondering what's happened in previous years with the funding allocated for it. It says that the cost in previous ones have been around $50,000. What's happened with that funding in previous budgets?
Did you need to, Director Kane, are you able to answer that question, Director?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'd be aware, Deputy Mayor, that in the past couple of years, as a result of COVID, the city reduced its budget allocations, particularly around the events program. So all of these things were scaled back, and that was an event that was not provided for.
I was elected in 2015 and we've never had a mayoral dinner, but this says that it's been continued in previous budgets. Have we had it in previous budgets?
I could have to go back into antiquity to work out when the last time a mayoral dinner was. I don't know if any of the Director Bride was here. Certainly the policy provision states it should occur in June or July each year. There's funding provided for civic events generically, and that includes these types of functions. So the fact that it hasn't been happened for some time is just inconsistent policy. I believe Ms Brown may be able to provide some guidance to me.
I'll just ask Ms Brown, you're at the microphone. Can you just introduce yourself for the purpose of the recording and respond to that question from the Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Suzanne Brown, Manager of Customer and Communications. We did some research to find out when the last mayoral civic dinner was held here, and we found that in 2013 a dinner was held by Commissioner Reynolds, and a mayoral civic dinner was held in 2012. That's all the information I've got right here, but we can keep digging if you'd like.
And you don't need to keep digging. I was just wondering what the basis for the comments were. So that $50,000 was the one done in 2013?
Ms Brown?
Sorry, could you say that?
So that $50,000 was the mayoral dinner in 2013, was it?
That's my understanding, but we'd have to have a deeper look at that to be sure.
And just lastly, given the various things that are supposed to be happening that haven't been happening, are we going to be updating CM 177?
CEO?
The short answer is yes. It's been 13 years since CM 177's been reviewed, so it's well and truly time to revisit the policy, as probably a number of policies we need to review.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Bain, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. When does should the officer recommendation be supported at the OCM, when does the city expect or anticipate that it will start selling tickets and soliciting local businesses for sponsorship?
I think I can answer that. We're waiting for the decision, obviously, next Tuesday before we, once we have direction from council, then we'll set about looking at ticket sales. We've got a little way to go before then, but we do have about 4 months at the moment. We have a provisional date set aside of the 27th of October and a second date, I think, which is the 10th of November. They set aside just because we had to book a date and in the hope that it's the proposition is actually supported by council. So I can't give you a date on when the tickets will be sold, but we've got some preparation yet, hopefully sooner rather than later, and certainly pending the outcome from next Tuesday's meeting, we'll be looking at talking about sponsorship very quickly with a number of companies. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next. Oh, excuse me, just one moment. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on now to item 7.2. It's CC 025 of 22. The item is the adjourned item, Land Utilisation Plan 2020 of 2025, minor review. The officer's recommendation is on screen. The responsible officer is Mr Stephen Kane to my right. Are there any questions in relation to this matter, councillors? We had a briefing on it just last week. Councillor Bain.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mallard Way. I just want to get a couple of confirmations from the city. So we're going to demolish the single house at 124, and then we're going to remove the underground diesel tank on the corner, and then the site is going to be used as a set-down area for Metronet. And then are we going to develop the land ourselves or sell it? Thank you.
Director, you're able to answer that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's the final part of the question is that's obviously the objective of the optimisation strategy now, to work out what the best form of progressing that site for some form of development, either as a joint venture, a city-owned development or the like. So all of those answers will come out from the study.
So will it be used as a set-down area for Metronet?
Through the Chair, there is a proposal to bring that back to Council in September. We have been negotiating a lease with Metronet in the interim. That is the intent, but that's obviously subject to Council's resolution.
Thank you. Any further questions on that, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We'll then move to CC. Oh, Councillor Holland. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. Councillor Holland.
Where are we at with this? With the amendment by Councillor Sabiri was not voted on, is that correct?
I think if you read the recommendation in the report, it talks through exactly what happened. There was a procedural motion moved by Councillor Spencer Teo, seconded by Councillor Singh, that debate be adjourned, and that's where we are today. Yep,
saw that. So that we didn't vote on that. So if I'm looking down here, doesn't it say that the bowling club is not to be included? Which is effectively inclusion of a new land optimisation, rather so specifically the former bowling club, to be included rather in that.
No, the amendment is that the following text be added to Part 1 after the wording Canning Bowling Club and Land Optimisation Project 9, Canning Arts Centre site in Riverton. That would be after, that would be included in Part 1. That was the amendment. And it hasn't been voted on yet. So we were still discussing and debating the amendment when the procedural motion was put. So no decision's been made on that.
No, I realise that. I'm trying to get my head around exactly how this words. Adopts a proposed revision and so forth in number 1, subject to proposed new land optimisation program, former Cannington Bowling. Oh, this is the alternate motion.
That's the alternate motion.
Yeah, but which we haven't voted, I understand. Be excluded in attachments 2, 3 and 4.
So we have an officer's recommendation there, which is at the top of your page this evening. Then we have the alternate motion, which was moved by Councillor Sabiri and seconded by Councillor Bain. And as we do with the alternate motion, that has actually been put to Council. It was under debate when the matter was actually adjourned, and so we just simply return to that. So that is an alternate motion. The officer's recommendation, I believe, was not put. So we only are dealing currently with the alternate motion, and that's subject to further debate on the night and obviously further amendment if required, and then we'll put it to the vote. And we had just had the SIB on it, obviously, last week.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, it's more procedural thing that I was inquiring about here, how we do it. So we come back on Tuesday, and what we'll be discussing, going back to where we were discussing.
We start exactly where we left off. So those who had spoken earlier don't start again. We're dealing with the alternate motion. We carry on with the debate.
I just had a shake of the head then.
No, I think
I did.
You might have had a shake of the head, but my head wasn't shaking.
So
we go back to where we were, and that's the alternate motion. We deal with it where we left off the amendment. Sorry, on the alternate motion. So we had the alternate motion put. And then we had an amendment moved by Councillor Holland, seconded Councillor Sweeney. And then after that, we actually had the procedural motion. So we go back to dealing with the amendment as we always do. The amendments are dealt with one at a time. So we'll discuss the amendment. If you haven't spoken on that, you've got an opportunity to speak to your amendment. Councillor Sweeney will then get to speak as the seconder to the amendment. Debate will then ensue. The amendment will be put to the vote. And if the amendment then is successful, it becomes part of the substantive alternate motion. If it doesn't, well, then we go back to the alternate motion and we start all over again.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions on that before we move on, councillors? Thank you. We'll move on then to CC 033 of 22, the monthly financial report for June 2022. The officer's recommendation is on screen and also appears on page 7 of tonight's agenda. Are there any questions on the monthly financial report? Thank you, Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I could just have some further information. Item 045015, Town of Victoria Park, $4,713.50. Could just find out what that transaction was for. And secondly, we seem to use a variety of landscaping services. So I noted as just a few: Loch Ness, Gambara, Collaborative, Horizon West. Do we have a list of preferred suppliers? Or do we have a contract with any, or is it ad hoc selection? Thank you.
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Bain, we used to have a panel of preferred suppliers, landscape architects and landscaping contractors. We will soon be revisiting that panel. The other contractors that you referenced there would be contractors that we engage to undertake various verge and other streetscape maintenance projects and operations, but I'm happy to take it offline and provide you with some more considered feedback.
Thank you. Any other questions on the monthly financial report? This would be the time to ask them. Councillor Holland.
Just a quick one. It doesn't seem, but correct me if I'm wrong, have we had any improvement at all in this month in the amount of temp staff that we're using?
Director Kane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It depends how you define improvement. Are we still using and continue to use at around the same rate, the same number of staff? The answer is yes. If there's some other definition for improvement, but as I said the other night when we were briefing this, the unemployment rate is such right now that the city will always use, or for the foreseeable need to use temporary labour to fill a variety of roles, which on a day-to-day basis it may be recruiting directly itself, but it does not have a permanent person in that role.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on, Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Just wondering, with regard to our investments and term deposits, what's the process we go through? Do we have a third-party vendor that ascertains the best term deposit and with the various banks, and then how do we decide which ones and whether that's the best rate to get?
Director Kane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through the Chair, there is a policy that covers local government investment. The city does have a third-party provider who trawls through all of the options for us, makes a recommendation to us for both the best rate consistent with also the risk profile of that. You'd be aware not every bank has the same level of assurance, from AAA down to, say, a BBB rating, and then they'll make a recommendation to us. So the aim is to get for each of the components of our investments that are continuing rollover, we would receive a recommendation once a month to extend or renew or to change an investment allocation.
Deputy Mayor.
And just, does that go through much scrutiny, or we just take what they say, as in that's the best rate?
Director Kane.
At the risk profile.
Through the Chair, no, it goes through scrutiny. The intent is to review what each of the recommendations provided to us. And I think in this particular report, Mr Mayor, I'm just scrolling down to the summary of investments there. As you'd see, the summary investments provided on the attachment 3 to that, both the profile and the allocation of where the investments are made. Clearly, none of myself or staff are investment bankers. We don't have access to the level of detailed information they have, nor to all of the money markets. So we do rely very much on advice given to us.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move to CD 013 of 22, the responsible officer being Director Graham Bride, the Director of Canning Development. It's adoption of scheme amendment number 6 to local planning scheme number 42, 46 to 50 Hartfield Street in brackets lot 326 Queen's Park, and 5 Godfrey Street being lot 414 in Queen's Park. The officer's recommendation is on screen, councillors. It also appears on page 28 of tonight's agenda. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Hardeep Singh. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, just to clarify, on page 29, where the location map is, there is a lot which is marked in blue, and then the Hartfield Park marked in red. Is it the lot marked in blue we are selling, which is 485 square meters to the Islamic Association?
Dr. Bride. Mr. Bride, for the record.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you look at that particular image, the whole of Hartfield Park is highlighted in red. It's only the portion you can see that's surrounded by the car parking of the Turkish Association. So it's a 485 square metre portion which takes in probably about a quarter of that overall red lot. So the subject land is the red lot overall, it's Hartfield Park, but the portion that's being considered for selling and rezoning is only that northern portion of the site. If you have a look at the scheme amendment documents, it's got a very clear map in there.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, and so what is this lot which is marked in blue? Is that being affected anyway? Are we selling this part? What is it?
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah, that lot in blue is Crown land owned by the state. It must have come up as part of the configuration of the mapping, so we can just remove that portion just to aid in any confusion. So it's not part of the amendment. The lot in blue is state government-owned land.
From the chaos in the chamber at the moment, I think it has confused council. So, councillors, just to clarify for those that were a little bit distracted then, the blue line is actually Crown land, so that has nothing to do with what's being proposed, and that will be removed from the map provided in the agenda papers. It will be published for next week, I believe. Is that right, Mr. Bride?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and also in order to, I guess, view the extent of that portion of Hartfield Park, there is the map on page 39 of the agenda clarifies exactly the dimensions and portion of the land involved. But we'll fix that blue lot for next week.
Good pick up, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of further questions.
Go ahead.
Trees on this portion of Hartfield Park which we are selling, have we taken any assessment if there are any significant trees which are eligible to be entered into our significant tree register?
Just the situation of the existing trees on that lot, Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, I know when the item was brought to council in August, there was an assessment done as part of the land acquisition by the Parks team, Dion Johnson. So what I can do is I can pull that out and distribute that to all councillors. I think there wasn't anything that was considered to be significant, but I'll reconfirm that with that material and send it around.
Thank you. And last question. Did we get a valuation of the land we are selling, and how much that valuation come up?
Director Bride.
Through Mr. Mayor, unless Director Kane is aware, we can take that one on notice.
Director Kane or Director Bowe, you got your finger on the button? Director Kane.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Mayor, when the matter was first presented to council last year, there was a valuation undertaken and the public notice period undertaken as a result.
Yes, there was a valuation undertaken at the time when the matter was last determined by council in August 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, are we selling the land as per the valuation? Is that something can be shared here right now? Or as per the deputation, I heard some figures, 200,000 something, we are selling this land. I'm trying to look at that amount and does it match with the valuation? So if someone can just enlighten me a little bit more on these figures, that would be great.
Director, can we provide a little bit of background just in context to that, just the value of the land, how we reached it, and if there was a valuation, how we arrived at the sale price? I think there was some negotiation between the city and the buyer. Director Kane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through the Chair, Mr O'Connor's sitting at the back. We did actually go through a valuation process. Chris, do you wish to add some context for the Mayor for that?
I'll just invite Mr O'Connor to come down to the microphone and just introduce himself to the meeting for the purpose of the recording and answer a question if you're able to. Thank you, Mr O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, councillors and staff. Chris O'Connor, Leader of Land Projects with the City of Canning. I wasn't directly involved with this specific matter, but I did have access in my computer here to the previous report, and it indicated that the valuation undertaken by McGee's was based on a zoning of residential R30 at a value of $210,000 was the valuation determined at that point in time.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Singh, at this stage?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Holland.
Yes, Mr Mayor, please indulge me for a minute. We brought this up last year, just because I can't remember every damn thing that we bring up. Where did we get to when it was brought up? There was a lot of debate about it and the basketball ring and all this sort of stuff. How come it's coming back now? I don't quite follow the procedure we've gone through here.
To execute councillors will, we need a scheme amendment, I think. Councillor Director Bride.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, there was a number of parts of that particular resolution in August 2021, and one of those was that the CEO be authorised or be requested to prepare a scheme amendment proposal, which facilitates the land acquisition or the land dealings. So in December 2021, Council agreed to initiate the scheme amendment. It's now been advertised and has come back. So, this is one of the last steps in the process. If Council agrees to support the amendment, and then that's the last step before the land acquisition process is completed. So there's another part of the process to finish after this.
Was Mr Walker correct when he said he would not be able to buy the land? I think that's what he said. Correct me if I'm wrong. Mr Walker, if you're still here, you can as well, but I think that's what he's saying. It's not available. It was only available to these people who are purchasing it now, not open to anybody else.
Director Bride.
I'll ask Director Kane to take that one.
Director Kane.
Thank you. Through the Chair, no, yes, that's correct. The City is transacting with one party, consistent with the Council's previous resolution. It is a requirement under the Act to advertise any land sale. If at that stage a third party were to come back and offer us a considerably higher sum for it, then we would have to present that back to Council as an alternate bid. But at this point in time, given the land is only going to be added to their car park, is surrounded by car parking, and it would be very difficult to develop for other purposes, I doubt we're going to get another bid come back in.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Holland?
You said that the loss of public open space because it's underutilised. Well, I don't think it's underutilised. I never thought it was. That's going to be offset with that other park. What is this? The other park of similar, the same size?
Through Mr Mayor, it's the same, 485 square metres.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor. Just before you start, Deputy Mayor, I've got Mr O'Connor. I'd like to just call him forward. He's got some further information that might assist Council before I refer to the Deputy Mayor. Mr O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I do apologise in response to Councillor Singh's question. I was reviewing the report on the fly. There was an initial valuation for a larger land area of $210,000. That was for an additional 100 square metres. The final land area, the 485 square metres, was valued at $175,000. So the city is receiving $20,000 additional to the market value from the Turkish Islamic Association.
Councillor Singh, I'll take your question first because obviously it deals directly with that answer, and then I'll go to the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Singh.
Thank you for the valuation answer. May I request that land we are selling for 200,000, which is valued at 170,000, which I believe is 485 square meter, to be exactly marked. And the reason I'm asking that is I live in Queen's Park, I live in this area. I'm not challenging the valuation, but a 485 square meter land for 170,000 valuation seems very less unless there is no access to the land, depends where it is. So I'm really interested to see exactly where the land is and what sort of access it is. And also would like to know, I think it's been said, can general public bid on it? For instance, if it's a really good piece of land, I mean, 170, 200,000 for 485, it's really cheap. I'm sure a lot of people would like to buy it.
I just remind councillors, tonight's not a debate, well, we're not debating at all, but this is not about a land transaction. Tonight's about the scheme amendment. The land transaction has been done. That was a council resolution. That decision has been set by this council in August last year. The land transaction is done. That has been a decision. We are now just executing the last part of that transaction, which is the scheme amendment, which was a requirement of council and was part of council's resolution. So I won't entertain any further questions in relation to land valuations. It's not relevant to tonight in the context that we're only speaking about the adoption of the scheme amendment. So I'm sorry, but that ship has already sailed. Councillor Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That helps. In case council doesn't accept the officer recommendation, what happens next?
Director Bride.
Through Mr. Mayor. If council did not support the officer's recommendation, I would suggest or strongly suggest that a councillor look at an alternate motion, because we have to provide a disposition to the West Australian Planning Commission. So there would need to be reasons as to why, from a planning perspective, the council does not wish to proceed to grant final approval to this amendment. So if a councillor is minded to not support the officer recommendation, I can certainly help them draft an alternative position.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
I was just going to provide the further information that Mr. O'Connor came and provided, so I've got nothing.
Terrific. Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Bone?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Will the concept plan for Godfrey Park be coming to council for its consideration?
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It wasn't intended to. There's a minor budget allocation to do some of the preliminary works at the time, but we can certainly bring that through either via a memo or a strategic issues briefing. Councillor Bain.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Director. Thank you, Councillor Bain. If there are no further questions on that item, we will move on. Thank you, councillors. We've already dealt with CD 012 of 22. We brought that forward earlier in this evening. So we move to CD 015 of 22. That item is on page 68 of the agenda and is going to be on screen now. The title of that being Adoption of Scheme Amendment number 7 to Local Planning Scheme number 42, Land Use Permissibility Modification from a Use Not Permitted X to Discretionary D in the Table 3 zoning table. The officer's recommendation is before you. Councillors, any questions on that item? CD 015 of 22 on page 68 of the agenda. Thank you, councillors. We will then move on. Councillor Bain, got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for the purposes of clarity, so Dewar agreed to the water management plan if the site was going to be used as a nursery, but they're objecting to the water management plan if it's going to be used as a garden centre. Is that correct?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, there's their particular water protection note number 25 specifies the different uses that are allowed in certain priority drinking water areas. So this is a priority 2 drinking water area. Their definitions of nursery and garden centre completely differ from the local government planning scheme. So as I said in the report, it references a garden centre. So a garden centre is a use that would include a smaller nursery. So from our perspective, when the development application comes in, we'll refer it off to DWER for them to make a recommendation on that proposal at the development application stage. But certainly the broader definition of garden centre in the city's planning scheme would accommodate a lower scale nursery and a more broader, more substantial garden centre with, composting of soils and a whole range of things. So within that large, broad definition of garden centre, there's I guess there's a large number of options for any applicant to put forward a proposal. This applicant is aware that they have to concentrate on the nursery aspect, so no manures and selling of those sort of products which could then leach into the groundwater. So when the application, if council agrees to this and the minister approves the amendment, and development application will be referred off to DWER, and they'd be able to specifically look and ensure that it meets their requirements at that stage.
Councillor Bain.
So DWER is objecting to the water management plan based on their definition of a garden centre. And given that is likely the case, would we be able to have some further information as to what the city considers a nursery garden centre and DWER what they consider to be a nursery and garden centre, just for a bit more clarity around this issue?
Director?
Yeah, we can provide a bit more information around that. I don't know whether the DWER specifically defines how they break up those two different uses, but we'll have a look and get back to council on that.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We shall then move on to CD 016 of 22 on page 106 of tonight's agenda. It's the initiation of scheme amendment number 9 to local planning scheme number 42. Any questions on that matter? Thank you, councillor Bain.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. 415 Welshpool Road. Will the reclassification from environmental conservation to district distributor road, will that impact that bit of bushland, that parcel of bushland to the southeast?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, no, that's quite specific to that very narrow strip, so there's no impact on the land to the southeast.
It just, in the report it shows a blue triangle and it also includes that bushland as part of that verge.
Yes, I'll take that back and get back to councillors on the exact amount of bushland, but the reality is it's just ensuring that the William Street, Orrong Road road reserves are correctly interpreted. It doesn't actually mean that there's going to be any clearing of the land, but I'll take your question on notice.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Bride. Any further questions on that item? There are none. Thank you. We will move on then to item 7.4. Director Warren Bowe is the responsible officer. There are no reports from that directorate. At item 7.5, Dr. Sarah McQuaid is the Director of Canning Community. We have Sarah Janali here tonight representing her. It is CO009 of 22. The title of the report being Youth Engagement Framework. The officer's recommendation is on screen, councillors. It's also on page 115 of tonight's agenda. Are there any questions in relation to that item? Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Just a question with respect to Objective 1.1, which is to foster and strengthen relationships with local schools and youth organisations to help facilitate youth civic engagement. I'm just wondering, and this might be a broader question through the city, but how will we make sure that the relationships go further than just the individual people involved? Through my time on council, when somebody goes on leave, that information's gone, nothing's ever linked to the role, rather it's all with the individual. And so how would we propose to make sure that those relationships go beyond the individual people involved, whether it be at the school and that person leaves the school, making sure that they're strong relationships that are linked to the roles rather than the people involved?
Mr. Knight.
Through you, Mr Mayor. That's a really great question and definitely a challenge in this space. Our approach is that the relationship should be with the team and the city as opposed to a specific officer. I think the actions around the quarterly meetings with schools will provide a really good vehicle for a number of city officers to attend to build connection with a number of school staff, ideally. I think the regular communications as well will help with that. The maintaining of a specific database that we can keep up to date as positions and roles change should assist with that process as well. Yeah, but definitely take your point and something that we'll consider through implementation.
Deputy Mayor, anything further? Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a minor correction on page 126. It has Fountain College in Linwood. It's in Ferndale.
Good pick up,
Through you, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
Bain. I
Thank
think
you.
that'll be noted. Thank you. We'll have that sorted out for next week's meeting. Appreciate that. Anything further, councillors, before we close up? Thank you. At item 8 of tonight's meeting, notices a motion for consideration. There are none. Item 9, urgent business, there is none. Confidential matters, we're not dealing with any this evening. Item 11, which is closure, and there being no further business. Councillors, thank you for your attendance tonight. I now declare the agenda briefing closed, the time being 7:16 p.m. And I thank you all for your attendance. If you have any further questions, please send them through to responsible directors or the CEO during the week. Thank you all.